Welcome to the Myesha podcast. I'm so happy that we finally have our safe space to talk about all the things. I have been praying and believing and hoping and waiting for this moment. And I'm so happy it didn't come before right now. You know why? There is a chance I could have been an inauthentic version of myself. And I would have come on here and pretended to be Miss Perfect Patty and doing all the things right and saying all the things. And now you got the version of me that doesn't care about what's politically correct. I'm going to share and talk, and we're going to have meaningful conversations about all parts of our life in a way that's productive and safe and healthy and good. So I am glad that it took me the amount of time it took me, because I needed to become the kind of person that can sit here in this seat and have these conversations. So welcome. Well, on today's episode, I want to share more about my homecoming. I want to talk about the experience that I had with God over these past 3 years, and how it has come full circle for me. So for those who are tuning in who don't know me and my story, you'll get to know that over the next few weeks. That's why this is a solo pod for now, because I wanted to set the groundwork. Many of you know this. I believe we should be seen, heard, loved, felt. And I didn't want to jump in interviewing people that didn't reflect that. I didn't want to choose guests because they were popular or because they had a great audience or following or any of that. I don't care about any of that. My work has to have meaning. So for the next few weeks, I really want to set the groundwork, allow you to get to know me, allow me to process some things that I've been engaging with online and questions that I've had and experiences that I had. I just want to lay the foundation properly and take our time. I want to be selfish and stingy with you, right? It took me this long to get you. I want to be here with you. It's me and you right now. And I didn't want to have a laundry list of questions to ask somebody else that they already shared on 20,000 other podcasts. I want the real, I want the raw, I want stories that are life-changing that you can hear and say, oh my goodness, that helped me. It was a key that unlocked something in me, and now I feel liberated or whatever. So I'm going to share this story and kind of along the way speak to different parts, and hopefully it helps you in your journey. So here's my homecoming. I was a pastor's wife for about 18 years, and I was in the church heavily. And even before then, I remember going to church as a kid. My mom took us to our church. The same church I had been a part of, that I married the pastor of, was the same church I've been a part of since I was born. And I remember going to that church. I had a relationship with God. I knew God. I remember in the third grade, just feeling the presence of the Holy Spirit. And I was like crying and overwhelmed, and I didn't want God to come back before I became a nurse or a singer or whatever. And I remember just my mom saying, go in the room, that's God, just go in the room and talk to God. And I did. And I continued to nurture that relationship with God. Always felt a calling, something different about me, not knowing why. And started singing more, singing in the church choir, showing up to church, outside of Sundays, because we had that we went to church on Sundays, and then we lived a very regular life Monday through Saturday. I went to parties, I listened to music. I just remember having a really normal, natural relationship with God, and also being a real teenager, like for real. So I eventually grew in my relationship with God. At 12, I officially raised my hand and went down to the altar and prayed the prayer. I got baptized. Later on in life, around 18, I met a guy who happened to be the grandson of the pastor of my church that I grew up in. And I fell in love. I literally jumped off the cliff. It was the first time that I had loved someone I had chosen to love. I had no evidence for what I wanted out of that relationship or what I was getting. I just knew this is the person I picked. I'm going to give every possible fiber of my being. I'm going to love with everything in me. And I even told him, I said, I will never mess this up. I will never do anything wrong to cause this relationship to end. And after about a year and a half, he told me that I was not his wife and that he wanted to find his wife. Well, it completely devastated me. And this is the point in my life where I feel like I got to know God face to face. This was my first real heartbreaking situation that I had ever had. This was the only person I had ever deeply cared for. And I remember just being face down, prostrate on the ground. Like people would say they were prostrate in church and I would hear them and be like, yeah, okay. But I literally, like, my face was on the carpet for days and days and weeks and weeks and weeks. And I worshiped through that breakup. I found God. That is when I got saved for real. That's when I met God for real. So I bring that up because it's a part of my spiritual journey of what accelerated my passion for God. And make a long story short, maybe 9 months later, he proposes, we get engaged. Now I'm full-fledged in church ministry. And my experience of church was very service oriented. It was like what I did for God. It was the respect I had from other people for what I did for God. A lot of rule following, a lot of don't do this, don't do that. I really followed the Bible as best as I could. I already had that trauma in my background of being a people pleaser and doing the right thing. And I had this story as a kid that as long as I did the right thing, I would be safe. So now I walk into religion in ministry at a high level, being next or with the person in charge. And it just brought on more and more of me doing all the right things. But worship was a special place that I had with God, that I felt like I could be the most vulnerable and the most connected. And so I remember like going into deep places with God. And if you were in those rooms ever, it was something. And I felt like this is the portal that God used to align me, to bring out the best and most emotional parts of me. I worshiped. I served as a worship leader for many years. I was a worship pastor. I did women's ministry. I was a women's pastor. I was the executive pastor at some point and COO and was very involved from beginning to end in the function of the church and the ministry and the leadership and hiring and firing and all these types of things. And I believe that I enjoyed it. There were parts of it that felt suffocating for me, but nonetheless, God was still very real. And I had given my life in service to God, his people, his church, his pastors, you name it. I was eat, sleep, drink, always around church, always in church. That was our livelihood. That's how we had our kids, our family. We grew up in church. Like it was just everything was church. So when it was time for me, fast forwarding, to get a divorce, I had expectation that the church that I had sacrificed for and been a part of and taught, I had gone back to school and got 2 master's degrees from Biola University in theology, one in spiritual formation in soul care, and then another master's in Christian leadership and ministry. So at this point, I not only had the experience, but I also had a depth of knowledge and understanding about how the Bible works, how God works, all these things. So I expected for me to go through my first real situation publicly in church and with God and with people, right? I had not had those encounters. I was not the person in the drama and the scandal and doing all those types of things. This was my first time ever doing or being a part or even being affiliated with something that wasn't positive, right? So I expected for people to show up for me and be a reflection of God in a dark season, and that didn't happen. And that led me to a crisis in my faith. I was deeply disillusioned. What is this? What has all this been about? Was this real? Is this a lie? Who is God? I questioned much of what I had learned and understood. Like I remember being a pastor and being in leadership and people coming and saying, how did God let my mom die? Like I could never serve him again. And I just remember thinking, but God is God and it's okay. Like you can make it through. And I used to, until I had to walk a path where I was like, none of this is making sense. Like my entire life was in question and what I had believed was in question because every representation of God in my life essentially failed me. I could not find one piece of evidence of God's goodness besides God in flesh. There was no place for me to turn. There was no place for me to go. And I don't mean this literally. Yes, there was a church on the side of the road that I could have walked in. But at this point, I had a certain stature in ministry. I was accustomed to ministry a certain way. So I had never been sitting in the pew. I don't know that. I've never had that experience of walking in a church and asking somebody to pray for me. What? I've been doing this since I was 18. I was with the person in charge since I was 18. And now I'm 40. And I'm going through the most gut-wrenching, embarrassing, dark season of my entire life. And I had no place to go in God's house, around God's people, the pastors, the friends, and all that. That was gone. So it took me on a journey. And it was my dark night of the soul. It took me on a journey of discovery to find out, who the hell am I? What am I here for? What is this all about? What was the purpose of my life? What was the reason? How is God going to get the glory out of all this? I couldn't understand it. So it was also liberating because I had been a part of all these rules and all these expectations and what people thought of me and what I should be, what I should do, how I was supposed to serve, and noise and all kinds of things that God never intended for me. But that was a heavy burden. And so when I was free from that, a part of me felt the relief of not having to go to church every Sunday and not having to perform and be all these things. So I used it as an opportunity to find, who is God? Who am I? What is all this about? And I went on a journey, and luckily God was with me. He never left me. Luckily, he still supported me in some ways. And I'm going to share more about that. And I don't know, I guess you gotta have walked through some stuff to understand what I'm saying. This was a dark chapter. And at this specific time that I'm thinking of, the divorce had been filed and had been made public. I had gone no contact, so it was very, very scary for me. This was a person I was with pretty much every day of my waking life for 18 to 20 years. And now I'm not even talking to them at all. So it was very, very scary, very, very dark. I got to experience life outside of church. And that was the first time that I had that. So I had a relative come to me, and it was in one of those kind of chaotic times. And she was like, well, I think you need to consult. And I'm like, consult? What does that mean? And she was like, you need to consult with a psychic. And I'm like, okay. Like in my tradition, faith tradition, that was a no. It was not even an option. It would have never, ever happened. Like that's only in the movies, right? So she had talked to this person and she trusted the person. So I was like, okay, this is how bankrupt and how depraved I felt spiritually. So I talked to the lady, and she was very nice and kind. I survived. I lived. I thought I was going to blow up. You know, am I going to blow up in pieces and whatever? And nothing happened. She gave me a lot of wisdom and a lot of support and guidance in this time. I didn't have a prayer partner, didn't have a wise counselor that I can really connect with and be honest with, that believed me, that supported me. So I went with it and called her, and then I was going through something else, and my other relative said, you need to get a candle. And I'm like, okay, well, I have candles in my house, but whatever, I'm willing to do whatever, because what else am I going to do? Am I going to die? Am I going to sit here and just die and let all this take place? Like, it was excruciatingly painful. So I went to this shop, and these beautiful souls were there and doing this work. I don't know what you might call them. I don't think they would call themselves white witches, but you could call them that. I don't know. But at the time, I had no idea. I just know there was a new community of people that was caring and compassionate, and I didn't have that. So I went, and yes, you're going to say that in a lot of ways I was naive. Yes, I was in a lot of ways, because I was inexperienced with this kind of stuff. Okay. The life that I lived is when something went wrong in your life, you prayed, you fasted, and then you trusted God for an outcome. There was nothing else. You read your scriptures and you just remained hopeful, and you waited for something to change. Well, the foundation that I had built my life on, that did not work for me in the ways that I thought. I wouldn't have been in the situation had it worked. Like, God, you couldn't have come up with anything else for me. So I went there, and they were a great source of just support. And they gave me this candle. I told them what I was going through, and they were like, okay, we got you. We got you. They gave me this candle. I went home and I did what they said. I burned it. I didn't think anything of it. And I was researching another modality, which was Reiki healing. And they asked at the end of the session, do you want to do a spell? And I was like, a spell? People do spells? So I was talking to my relative, and I was like, yeah, they asked me if I wanted to do a spell. And she was like, well, that's what the candle is. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I realized, like, I am off into something else. But at the time I was like, well, what else do I have? So that was helpful to me, because I didn't have any other option, in my opinion. And I wouldn't have sought these things out. They kind of came to me through people that I trusted. And so I went with it. I tried Reiki healing. I tried acupuncture and Chinese medicine. I went to Bali. I saw a healer there, and he kind of told me my life, and it was beautiful. Normally I would be really scared about things like this, but I was really in some ways trusting God, but it was a different God that I was in relationship with. And I'll explain that. He was the first man to really speak into me without benefiting from my service, benefiting from my talent. He spoke into my soul, and it was exactly what I felt and exactly what God knew that I felt. And so to me, that man was God's hand extended to me. And I want you to see me as this soul just on a pilgrimage and searching for answers, searching for who am I, searching for revelation, searching. And that God in his providence still held me along the way. You would never, ever hear me say that I left God, but I did open my heart to have experiences that may be in opposition to God's way in some way, right? Like who goes and talks to these people on a regular basis and goes to church on Sunday? Like, we're taught and trained that they are in opposition to each other. And for a period of time in my life, and really the darkest point of my life, I found some refuge and support in these other things. And I tried all kinds of things. I did plant medicine, which was very, very helpful to me. And I'm going to have to do a whole episode on plant medicine. But I met God in a very unique way. And when I said that this God was different from the God that I had known, I met the big G God. And when I say the big G God, like on the medicine journey, I had an experience with God that was so powerful. I mean, it was like a force of like a billion colors coming up from like the depths of the earth all the way to like the heavens. Like, just imagine. and it was going like full force, like full speed. And it was this incredible, powerful sense of love. It was pure love, and it was just flowing. And it was almost like I stepped out. If that flow of love was like a freeway, it was like I was trying to merge in, like I had come out to experience it. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is God and this is love. Like I had an encounter with pure, unadulterated love, and the feeling was powerful. Then I went to nature. I spent a lot of time in the grass, with the trees, with the bushes, walking, finding myself in God's creation, and it was healing for me. So I had experienced God inside of the church for 18 years, which I call the God of the Bible. Sometimes that gets mixed up with the people in our life, because the God of the Bible and the God of the church also got merged with my ex-husband's voice. So when he was the pastor, he had leadership over me at a very young age. God's voice and his voice really got intertwined in an unhealthy way. And so when he would tell me what God said, it would be what he was saying, but it was also what I interpreted as God saying. And it kind of created a unique dynamic that people who are married to pastors might experience, might not experience. But for me, there was a lot going on in there, and it got really discombobulated between, well, who is God of the church that I grew up with? Who is the God that I've been taught over the last 20 years in this marriage? And what does all that have to do with this God that I'm experiencing in the world, right? Without church, like not going to church every Sunday, still feeling very connected to humanity and connected to God, but the God was different. It was a part of God that I had not experienced before. And it was powerful and it was beautiful. And that's what kind of helped me throughout this seeking time in my life. And so I continued just doing the best that I can. I read a lot of books on energy and the law of manifestation. I read books about all kinds of things that I would never do, because you're in church. Like you read things that help your faith and you read positive stories, but that's about it. And so now I didn't have those rules to govern it, and I allowed myself to be led, essentially.